Old students of mine from many, many years ago still remember the horror. 8 o'clock morning lecture in organic chemistry. At 8 o'clock, as soon as the second hand swept past the 12, I would lock the doors. You don't show up late to any of my lectures. I was, they weren't using the term douchebag back then, but I was. They asked me to talk about the history of furry fandom. The person who should be up here should be Fred Patton. He is the worldwide expert. But furry fandom is still a relatively new phenomenon. Relatively. It's older than many people who were at this con. But in the 1980s, during a time that I call the comic book revolution, there was a time when little comic book companies were cropping up left and right all over the place. And now we had an opportunity for artists to get their work out there. Whereas previously, what were you going to do? You draw it for your friends. There was no internet back then. Oh, they had these bulletin board services which you would dial into on your telephone. Those were interesting days. Those were the slow days. Those were the days when you would dial in, and there are those of us who can still hear the modem talking in our minds. And you would go to the bulletin board and you'd see, oh, so-and-so has posted a new picture. Great, we'll click to view the picture. And you'd see the cursor go and start rendering the picture line by line. And you'd go get a sandwich, a cup of coffee, you'd come back, go take a shower, go outside, maybe go down the mall or something, check out the latest bookstore or something. And you come back home and you're 2/3 of the way through the picture, and your goddamn sister had picked up the phone. Yeah, the old people going, young people like, yeah. Anyway, in those days, there were people who liked anthropomorphic animals. We were called cartoon fans back then. There were some artists who drew these things. Typically, they would get together at room parties at science fiction conventions. That was where the imaginative people would go. It was the science fiction cons, the SF cons, and they would have different room parties for different special interest groups. And as the comic book revolution, as I said, took off, the artists who previously would just share their art with their friends actually had the opportunity to put their art out to a larger public. And little titles came out that were all furry. They had names like Omaha the Cat Dancer, Albedo Anthropomorphics, Usagi Yojimbo, and this goofy-ass, absolutely ridiculous, what the hell is this? I remember seeing it on the shelf at the comic book store. And I looked at it and said, the fuck is this? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? This ain't going nowhere. And I had it in my hand, and I put it. And people began to take notice, because prior to that, what we call furries, they referred to them as funny animals, based on a 4-color comic from the late 50s, early 60s, I believe. Before these guys came along, furries, as we call them, generally did one of two things. They either chased mice in an endless, fruitless pursuit, or they continually chased ground-dwelling birds only to fall off of cliffs and pick themselves up and dust themselves off and order something from Acme to help. I remember in 1989, Some asshole out there saying, "Oh, it would be bored." 1989 Worldcon. There was a fan table, and that's what they would do. The big cons would allow fan groups to set up a table just to kind of, hey, we're a fan group. This is what we do. This is what we are. And there was a table for Furry Fandom. And I can recall it was staffed by two fellows who, as developers of a fandom go, these were probably two of the driving forces behind it. John Nunemacher, if you go back to the old Usenet archive, you'll see his name everywhere, and Stephen Stadnicki. Stephen, shortly thereafter, was one of the people who created a computer-based, text-based reality that they called Furry Muck. It was based off of the burgeoning multi-user dungeons. As computers were becoming networked, usually through academic servers, people would do these D&D style games. And I remember those MUDs, they were called, multi-user dungeon. Typically what would happen is you would log into it, it would say create a character. And you would go into the text system here, and it would say, okay, you are in a room. There is a paladin here. You are dead. Okay? So you make another character. And it would start the same way. You are in a room. There is a fighter here. You are dead. I never really got into them because that was kind of boring after about 23, 24 characters. But they created this thing, this furry muck to differentiate it from a mud. It was designed to be a social environment, not a, you enter a room, there is a fox, you are dead. They took out the fighting element. While that was being worked on, a couple of fellows in Southern California who ran a rather successful and well-attended furry party at a local science fiction convention got it into their heads that maybe furries should have their own convention. This was toward the late 1980s. It didn't help that in those days there was an interesting attitude among science fiction fans. There was a movement where people would kind of loftily look at you and say, you're not a real science fiction fan, you're not into A, B, C, D. The sword and sorcery people, that's not real science fiction. You're just a media fan, science fiction is books, blah, blah. So they would kind of start to do things like vandalize the signs of the special interest groups. There is a very, very famous incident. Somebody snapped a picture of it. It was mid-1980s, thereabout. At this convention, there was a sign that said, Furry Party, room 1218. And somebody had very, very rudely scrawled on it, skunk fuckers. Only they knew. At these parties, you would usually go in, and it was filled primarily with artists with the black sketchbooks, those hardcover black sketchbooks. And the rooms were typically silent, because the artists were sitting there, all you'd hear would be the scrape of the pencil, all over the place. And then they'd throw it around. So these two fellows decided, maybe we need a convention of our own. This one's getting too big, and we got these people here who are sneering at us, saying that because we don't put on Spock ears, we're losers. There is nothing in the world more disheartening than to be called a loser by a guy wearing Spock ears. It's very, very hurtful. So they started, it was pretty much a garage party that was fairly successful. So the next year they moved it to a hotel, and they called it Conference. See what they did there? This verb. Conference. Conference 1 was, and someone will have to correct me, I believe that was 1989 itself. was the first year that Conference 1 ran. I had myself, at that very same year, run into Stephen and John at the fan table at Worldcon. So the birth of Conference kind of corresponded with me discovering there was such a thing as Furry Fandom. Now I will put forth a postulate, which I often postulate. There's no such thing as a person becoming a furry. You are a furry. It's what you are, it's what you do, it's what you like. It's only at some point later in life you discover there's a name for it, and you discover there's other folk out there like you. Now, you folks who are under 25, by which I mean fetuses, you can discover these things very easily. All you do is go toddling over to the computer, which you probably know how to operate more than your parents do, and you just, oh, and there it is. It's all over the place for you. Back then, we didn't have that. The internet was still a very, very small, it wasn't even worldwide, really. It was still primarily networked academic institutions. But in that network, you could reach out and you could meet other people. I did a postdoctoral assignment at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park in 1991. Now, having met these furries and seen the artwork and seen the comics, I was blown away. They had some of the early drawings of Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. And it captivated me because funny animals didn't have to be funny anymore. You can tell actual stories. You can develop characters. And that just, my mind just opened up. Wow, look what we can do with this imagination that the great Juju gave to us. We can breathe life into these creatures. Live vicariously through them. If you're not familiar with Usagi Yojimbo, should be. It is one of the longest running furry comics. I think it's in, what, 35th year or something heavenly like that. Stan Sakai has been drawing it the entire time, and it is heroic tales of the samurai of Japan told in an all-animal universe. I love Stan to pieces. He's like a little Japanese hop. He's only like this tall. And he recently has grown a white beard. Just think Mr. Miyagi. That's Stan Sakai today. He's got this really, nice, cute voice, and he loves to talk about his work. And he described it beautifully, because he always gets a table at Worldcon, and he's got his art there. He says, I love it when people see it for the first time. They pick it up, they say, oh, a cute bunny. Oh, he kills people. That's pretty much Usagi Yojimbo. So in 1991, when I was told about this furry muck, this thing, this phenomenon on the computer, I thought, well, heck, that's for me. Let's look into this. Furry muck, for the longest time, was where furries gathered. You either went onto the computer, or you went to Conference in California. That was a little difficult to get to, but we had that virtual world. I went to my first conference in 1992, and it was quite an eye-opening experience, because I actually got to meet these people that I had been talking to on the computer in this virtual world. And that I think is where we had the beginning of the very, very strong and unique sense of community that we have today that cannot be denied. There was a really, really strong sense of belonging to this group. For a number of years, that's what we had for furry conventions. It was Conference. In 1995, or thereabout, something happened. Now, I see a bunch of red lights on cameras out there, and this is going to wind up on YouTube, and I'm going to start getting hate mail from people. But you came here to hear history, history. A convention in Philadelphia, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, science fiction convention in the world, PhilCon. They were a fairly large convention, and they tried to keep diversity in their dealer's room in those days. They didn't want the dealer's room to be overwhelmed by a particular genre, so they would want to know what kinds of stuff you intended to sell. If they had a certain number, they had this whole algorithm, because they were all computer geeks back then. Certain number of book dealers, certain number of media things, and for artists and people dealing in the sub-fan groups, a certain number of Star Trek related, a certain number of Star Wars related, and a certain number of furry related. There is controversy to this day. I used to volunteer for PhilCon, so I had a little bit of an inside view. Apparently, a single individual purchased all 4 of the tables that had been allocated for Furry Fandom, and then proceeded to sublet those to at least 8 or so furry people, half a table each. And PhilCon got word of this and said, excuse me, no, you can't do that. The person who had arranged this venture became very irate and started to proclaim that PhilCon was anti-furry. PhilCon hates furries. You know, and furries, we hate PhilCon too. And we're going to set up our own convention in the hotel across the parking lot. It'll be a sort of screw you PhilCon. It'll be on the same weekend and all that. PhilCon didn't hate furries before that. Afterward, it caused a rather significant rift between Furry Fandom and PhilCon, which was a powerful force in the science fiction community. The following year, that little convention, I think it was at first called Furtasticon, and then they started calling it Conference East, which was a little bit of a misnomer. They had nothing to do with Conference in Anaheim at the time. They moved it to New Jersey, North Jersey, exit 112 on a parkway. It was, oh boy. All right, it was just outside Newark. Actually, it was in the middle of Newark. It wasn't the best venue. We're just going to leave it at that. It then moved to Ohio, which a lot of people were like, okay, I don't want to go to no frickin' Ohio. I got my choice of furry conventions, Ohio or Anaheim. Which am I going to go to? So this Conference East Furtasticon, call it what you will, sort of faded away. But the country had gotten its first taste of an East Coast furry convention. This folk in this, what's 95% of the population lives within 2 minutes of New York or something like that. You need to go look at your geography texts. We had a lot of population out on this coast who started to think, oh boy, we don't have to fly cross country. So a bunch of fellas who were students at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Albany, New York, set up a little tiny convention there. They called it Albany Anthrocon. And it was billed as an East Coast Furry Convention. Accurate, if not overly imaginative, as the theme for that year. And it was surprisingly successful. I went, and I thought it was actually kind of cute, because I'd been involved in helping run PhilCon as a volunteer for many, many years, so I was familiar with convention operations. And I just look at these guys going, oh, that's adorable. They'll learn. It had an interesting sort of evolution. Conference was starting to change by this time. The atmosphere at conference was becoming a bit bawdy. Now, it always had been, but there was very, very little attention to any form of public decorum. To this day, there are controversies. Some people say that it was deliberately marketed to the fetish communities. Other people deny that. I don't know for sure. But considering how a lot of it looked, I think I know where I would believe. One of the years I was at conference, they had a nice atrium, big atrium with a big balcony overlooking, and this beautiful kind of semicircular grand staircase that went up from the ground floor to the atrium. And I was walking up, and a young fellow went bouncing past me. His persona apparently was a rabbit. And he had done the most phenomenal body makeup job. Highly detailed, you know, actually made fur in it. And it was, as soon as he went past, the first thing I thought was, that is a spectacular makeup job. And the next thing that went through my mind was, that's all he's wearing. I'm just going to go downstairs now, okay? Yes, there were some folk who were not comfortable with the atmosphere at a conference, and I confess I was one of them. They had a charity event called a pet auction. I'm just going to leave that to your imagination, okay? To this day, it's kind of frowned upon to have any charity event that's like, oh, why don't we have like a pet auction? The old people are going to say, no, just no. They asked me at Conference 9, because by then I had gotten the reputation for being a storyteller, and they asked me if I would MC this event. My response was very, very loud and rhymed with duck crow. And they said, oh, no, we want to try to clean it up. I say, there's not enough bleach in the state of California to clean that up. I'm sorry, I'm not interested. I said, no, what we're going to do is we're going to impose some rules. That's a good start. They said, we're going to try to make sure that it's all wholesome and all that, and we want you to run it. I said, okay, I'll run it, but on my terms. You want me to run it, you got to do it my way. And they said, sure, what do you want? And I said, okay, first off, you're not going to call it a pet auction anymore. And they said, but that's traditional. I said, then get yourself another person to run the event. And they said, oh, well, what would you call it? I said, I don't know. It's for charity. Frickin' call it the charity auction. I invented that. Call it the charity auction. If people are offering up services, these services, I demand, must be performed and legal to be performed in the lobby of the hotel. So they said yes. It actually, I was skeptical, but it actually worked. Artists offered up commissions, which, ooh, wow, including artists who typically were not known to give commissions. Yeah, that was a rarity. Wow, you get a commission from this person. A very, very well-muscled young man who was a bodybuilder was offering in the hotel gym I believe a 1-hour personal training session to teach you how to appropriately exercise. That's good, we like that. There was a lady who was offering a Swedish massage, and she was able to show that she was a professional masseuse. Okay, that's good. And then this young lady, got up on stage and unzipped her jumper and said, I'm offering buyer's choice. And I put my arm around her shoulder and said, and I'm offering to get you off my stage. Thank you so terribly much for playing. I was humiliated, but I'm a comic. What do? You make a joke out of it. So I got the microphone and I said, we're terribly, terribly sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Not sure how that got by. We wouldn't want to upset the Buena Park Police Department, our boys in blue, out there protecting and serving us, would we? As soon as I said that, there was a guy in the front row with a cowboy hat and big sunglasses on. He just quietly stood up and walked out. Nobody'd seen him before, nobody's seen him since. I don't know, but I got my suspicions. It was that same year that I was approached by one of the organizers of Albany Anthrocon that I'd been to in 1997. They wanted me to be their guest of honor for their second year in 1998. Been a guest of honor before. I was thrilled, and I said, well, why me? Like I said, these guys were so cute because they were still starting out. They hadn't quite learned. He gave me the wrong answer. He said, everybody else said no. All right, okay, all right. I'm cool with that. I'm cool. Okay, I'll be your guest of honor. So 1998, I was guest of honor. Yay, I'm guest of honor at Albany Anthrocon. Woo, yay. And I'm still not totally sure what transpired. But when I came home, I was chairman. I got home and sat down in my chair and said, hey, I'm chairman. Wait. I like to tell this story to the guests of honor at Anthrocon. I tell them the story, I say, yes, that's how they get you. Also around about this time, there was a little gathering of furry fans. Again, the internet was growing. The world was becoming connected, and folks in Europe were discovering that there was this furry fandom. 96, 95 or 96, just about the time Albany Anthrocon was getting off the ground, a gaggle of kids. Well, I can call them that because I've seen the pictures. They were a gaggle of kids. It was so sweet. They got together and they held the first Eurofurence. And I think it was in the Netherlands that year, or some god-awful place like that. But they actually did a really, really good job. They are a dedicated crew. Many of you have heard me talk about Eurofurence. These folk pour their heart and soul into it. Primarily, it's run by Germans, and Germans, they simply do not do anything halfway. I'm not going to say it. Just ask Poland. Okay, I said it. All right, all right. Sorry, too soon. But they were kind of bouncing around Europe. Let's pick a different European nation every year and have our con. We were growing. When I became chairman of Albany Anthrocon, I said, okay, number one, it's going to have to move. We're going to have to move it out of Albany. We're going to have to move it to my hometown of Philadelphia. Because, as I said at the time, there is no way in hell I am going to drive 4 hours to chair my own convention. Cryo's in the back with this giant shit-eating grin on his face. So, Albany Anthrocon moved to Philadelphia and became Anthrocon. And I will tell you also something that I don't think I've ever told in a history of either Furry Fandom or of Anthrocon. I'm one guy. I have a convention down here. There's not really a lot of local furries. There's a couple I can tap. I'm going to need assistance. I'm going to need help. And I thought, maybe I could approach PhilCon to help out. Now, 2 of the PhilCon convention committee still are very, very, very old and dear friends of mine. So I floated the idea to them, and they said, well, we do have, it's in our charter to offer assistance to smaller conventions that want to start up. You might have a little bit of an uphill battle, but we'll put in a good word for you. I said, okay. So the next time they had a convention committee meeting, I went. I went to it, and I'm, kind of standing in the background, being all polite and deferential. And say, oh, thanks. Hey, let's do this. Don't worry. Trust me, I'm a professional. So I'm standing there, and in the back, when they finally said, okay, any other matters? And I said, yes. And they said, yes. And I said, I'm Sam Conway. You might have seen me. I've been a volunteer at PhilCon for 20 years now. I would like to ask PhilCon's assistance to start up a furry convention in this town. There was a reaction. There was a reaction. And one guy stood up and said, "You would have to get on your knees and beg us." I would like to ask PhilCon's assistance in starting a furry convention in this town. And the room got quiet, and they kind of looked at me. And they looked at each other. And they kind of whispered and talked. So they, I heard my friends say, "It is on our charter, And they're like, So they agreed. Now that was why those of you who went to Anthrocon in those early years might have noticed that a lot of the equipment had PhilCon stamped on it. Then, as we started to grow, there was equipment with PhilCon stamped on it and equipment with Anthrocon stamped on it. Then we outgrew PhilCon, and now at PhilCon there was a lot of equipment with Anthrocon stamped on it, which I thought was really cute. Anthrocon took off. There were other conventions springing up like mushrooms after the spring rain. Midwest Fur Fest began in Chicago. They had grown out of a convention called DuckCon, the DuPage County Science Fiction Convention, DuckCon. Now, again, I don't know if I'm going to get trouble for this, but I calls them like I sees them, okay? There was a really, really big furry presence at DuckCon, and similar to what had happened at other conventions, as they rotated people into their convention committee, they started to say, we don't want these non-science fiction fans. They're not real science fiction fans. We don't want your kind here. So there was pressure on the furries to kind of beat it. You're not really part of our group. So the furries went home sniffling and wiping their eyes, and they got together and said, well, if we can't go to DuckCon, we'll start our own little convention, and we'll call it Midwest Fur Fest. Now, my understanding is that Midwest Fur Fest, that very first year, was a rather surprising and rousing success, whereas DuckCon lost approximately 50% of its attendance. For some reason, the following year, DuckCon asked me to be their guest of honor. I went, and some furries went, but most of them were like, we got our own convention now. They were followed by conventions in places like Atlanta, Northern California. How many are there now? I don't know. I'll go to WikiFur, and then 20 minutes later I'll go again, and there'll be 3 more conventions somewhere. In those early days, those halcyon, salad days of our youth, it was kind of easy. We worked all together to try to make sure we didn't step on each other's toes. These people kind of have the winter season and the West Coast. These people got the summer season in the Northeast, and these people... It was easy when there were 6 or 7 of us. Now, you pretty much have a furry convention every weekend, and probably several. That, for the most part, is where we are now. Now, there's fluctuation. There are some conventions that came into being and then went away. Conventions will go away for a variety of reasons, which I will not get into on camera. But we are still going strong. I mean, just sounded serious. Just the mere fact that most of the good conventions are seeing significant growth. I think Midwest was something like, you know, holy crap. What did they go up this year?
6,000.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was it the year before? Yeah. So they went up by, what, 40, 50%? This other con is going up by, oh my God, %. This con's going up by, oh my God, %. And this con's going up by, oh my God, %. And I'm watching Anthrocon come up thinking, because it's a daunting task being the person at the head of such an unstoppable behemoth as Anthrocon. On the other hand, I try not to play this card. It's not what I am. You know, I try to be a modest guy, but there's a certain amount of fun in knowing that all I have to do is call up the mayor's office and say, you know, I'm not happy. Oh, what would you like? What would you like? We'll make it happen. I don't want this guy to be alive. Oh, we'll take care of that.
Go away from tower.
That's the one thing they've not been able to provide. Those of you who've been to Anthrocon might notice on either side of 10th Street in front of the convention center are two open parking lots. And for strange reasons, there are escalators on the front of the convention center that run down to the front of the building and stop. Do you ever wonder why? They're going to build 2 additional hotel towers there and expand the Westin. Apparently, they were getting a lot of funding from the state, and that funding vanished kind of unexpectedly, so they didn't have the money for it. I don't let them forget that they promised me those towers were going to be there. You might also have noticed, if you've been to Anthrocon, that when these 2 towers didn't materialize, they still wanted to connect the convention center to the Westin and said, well, we'll just build a sky bridge. So they went to the 2nd floor of the Westin and they started building the sky bridge, and they got all the way across and they realized this doesn't line up with the O. So it kind of ends, and they got 2 World War II surplus elevators and put them in. They're still steam driven. You can hear it hiss when they go up. There's this like a big steam engine down the bottom. That was kind of funny. You know, I was always under the impression that when you're going to undertake a major construction project like that, you do something like, you know, hire an architect to tell you, you know, this has to go up or has to go down a little bit. But they didn't. Where are we going? Up. Anthrocon is adding more hotels. Other conventions are adding more hotels. We're doing our best to keep putting on a good show. And I am very, very hopeful that even if the convention continues to grow at the rate that it is, that we can still continue to put forth the quality that we strive to put forth. And I think I speak for all the chairmen in this business. Why do we do it? We certainly don't do it for the money, because we don't get paid. We certainly don't do it for the enjoyment, because we don't. We do it for you guys. And why do we do it for you guys? Because you guys are worth it. It's what we do. It's what we want to do. I have a little, my little private pipe dream, my little fantasy. When the Powerball gets above $600 million, I buy a ticket. Now, I know. Who was it? Was it Jonathan Swift, I think, said you have an equal chance of winning whether you play or not. But at $600 million, after taxes and fees and all that stuff, there will be a fairly significant amount of money left over. It will be the proper amount of money left over, based on my best calculations. If that happens, I'm going to have it converted into cash, and I'm going to put it in one of those giant old-fashioned steamer trunks. And I'm going to go to a Pittsburgh City Council meeting. And I'm just going to wait quietly in the back, and when they say, any other matters to discuss, I'm just going to say, yes, I'm Sam Conway with Anthrocon. I would like you to build the hotel towers you've been promising me since 2004. And they'll say, well, we'd like to, Dr. Conway, but there simply isn't funding for it. Make with the building. It's like, let that happen. Because you guys know me, that's exactly how I do it. Any questions? Yes, yes.
I don't know if you'll want to necessarily answer this question.
Okay, I'm very, very worried when someone starts with that, but let's go ahead.
Let me just,
yeah.
But when do you foresee that Anthrocon will outgrow the David Lawrence Convention Center?
That? Okay, I will say, you're right. I don't want to answer the question because I don't want to think about it.
That's what I said.
Pittsburgh is the ideal venue. It is an awesome city. The city of Pittsburgh took to furry fandom like nothing ever before. I mean, furry conventions kind of crop up in cities, and the cities are like, that's really cute. Yeah. I don't know if you guys know it, but we have been Philadelphia based. The city of Pittsburgh lobbied to have Anthrocon relocate from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. And they lobbied very, very hard. Anthrocon was looking for larger digs because we had outgrown the affordable locations in the city of Philadelphia. The Pennsylvania Convention Center in Philadelphia was the next logical choice, but without going into detail, they were unenthusiastic about having our business. And it was about that time that I got a phone call from Jennifer Basek at Visit Pittsburgh. That's the Pittsburgh Convention and Visitors Bureau. And she said, hi, how would you like to move your convention to Pittsburgh? And my response was very loud and rhymed with duck snow. Because I'm a Pennsylvanian, and specifically I'm a Philadelphian. The last time I had seen Pittsburgh was in 1981. And if you ever saw the movie Flashdance, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It was a steel town. And it was a steel town. And I said, absolutely not. It is out of the question. And she said, why? And I said, well, please don't think me rude, but your town is a festering shithole. It's a smoky door to hell. I might as well have my convention in Mordor, so thank you very much. I was very rude. But despite that, she called the next day and said, we happen to be in town. Why don't you have lunch with us? I thought, we're going to have a hard sell. I said, you buying? She said, of course. I said, I know this nice expensive steak restaurant. I'll meet you there. So I went at lunch, and they had gotten one of these big round tables that seats 10. And there were 9 people, and when I walked in, they all stood up, and they're all got their nice suits on, and I'm being introduced all around. Here's somebody from the Westons, somebody from the Omnis, somebody from the Doubletree, somebody from the mayor's office, 3 people from Visit Pittsburgh. This guy didn't know who he was, but he looked important. We sat down, and I ordered, And as soon as I ordered, they started hitting me with, oh, well, we're going to offer you, and we're going to give you, and we think you could use this, and this will be fine, and we can provide, and we can do this, and we can give you this, and we can do that. It was like, because prior to this, it was more common for a furry convention to get thrown out of a city than it was for one to be invited in, let alone be begged to come in. And I said, okay, whoa, stop, just everybody, stop just a moment, please. I want to make sure that we're all aware we're talking about a furry convention here, right? And Jen nodded to the lady next to her. It was Michelle Morgan, by the way, at the Westin. And they pulled out this, I didn't know they made 3-ring binders that big. It was worse. And they opened up and they had printed out, remember this is days of yore, they had printed out Tiger Wolf's webpage, they printed out Peter Cat's about Furry Fandom webpage, they printed out all these furry pages, they printed out some pages I wish they hadn't printed out. And I would say they printed out my webpage, and I'm looking at it saying, my God, you people have really done your research. And they said, well, absolutely. I said, you still want the convention out there? And they said, we do. I thought about it, and I said, well, I still am going to have to decline. My entire volunteer base is here in Philadelphia. The logistical challenge of getting everything out there and having the manpower to put it together, it's just insurmountable. We can't do it. And they all looked at each other, and Michelle nodded to that guy that I didn't know who he was, and he took out a briefcase. And he turned it around and he said, would this change your mind? And I looked in, I smelled something like apples, and then I woke up in the West. That's not true, I made that up. What happened was, Jen Basic nodded, she said, okay, we appreciate that, but we would like to ask you to do one thing. And I said, well, what's that? She said, we just want you to come out and see the city. Okay, that sounds fair. All right, you guys came all this way, I'll do that. I've got a weekend coming up, I'll take a drive out to Pittsburgh. 4.5 hours away. You ever hear the expression, it's an old expression, to eat crow? It's been said that Pittsburgh is the only city in North America that makes an entrance. And it's true. You either come through the Fort Pitt Tunnel or you come around the mountain on 376. And I came around that mountain and it was like being smacked in the face with a beautiful trout. I mean, I almost ran off the road. I'm like, what the heck, Jesus? Who built this magnificent city in front of Pittsburgh? Because the steel mills, they closed down and moved out. All the smoke had kind of dissipated. And the city said, well, we should probably start scrubbing those buildings off. Oh my gosh, those buildings have color to them. And I was just, my breath was taken away. And I drove to the west of this beautiful, gleaming, nice hotel tower, and I got out, and I was like, whoa, oh boy. And Jen and Michelle met me in the lobby, and they took me into what was then the original Fish Market restaurant for dinner. They had done their homework. There were 4 bottles of Riesling on the table. When I woke up the next morning, that's where that part came in. They took me on a tour of the convention center. And I knew right away, okay, I don't care what the logistical challenges are, this place is perfect. I would be an idiot to even consider turning this down. But you know, this is business. You can't be all eager and everything. So I'm looking at the convention center and say, I don't know, this room is awful square. The way the ceiling is kind of you know, all the way overhead. And that river, it's got a lot of water in it. Yeah. Let me call my board of directors, and I'll see if I can talk them into it. I come up, guys, you come on, see this, come on, let's do it, come on. So we've all decided we would bring the board of directors out to see it. Before I left, and I will recommend this for anybody who still thinks they want to start a convention and hasn't learned yet. Before I left, I stood with that same group of 10 people on the roof of the convention center with my back to the river, and I said, all right, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to come and see this quaint little building of yours. But I will bring it to my board of directors. Before I do so, I want to make sure everyone is very, very clear on one single fact. This is a non-profit organization. There is no giant corporation bankrolling us. The amount of money we have in the bank is all the money we have. But we don't intend to keep it. It's gonna stay here. In other words, I would show up here with a giant laundry basket full of money, and I'm gonna give it to you. And if there's still a nickel left in it when I go home, I'm gonna come back the next year with a bigger basket of money, which I will give to you. And if there's still a nickel left in it, I'm gonna come back the next year with a bigger basket. And that's gonna keep happening. But the very first year I have to put my own nickel into that basket, it all ends. Am I understood? And they said yes. That was August of 2004. We have never had a cost overrun. Because it's the city of Pittsburgh that came up with the phrase, you don't fuck with a Kage. That was a very long answer to your very short question. I could not imagine Anthrocon being anywhere else. We have become so deeply entrenched in the Pittsburgh city scene. We've become a city institution. How could we possibly leave?
So with that in mind, follow-up question, do you think it'll be more likely that they'll increase the size of the convention center to accommodate?
I did a little analysis for them. See, I'm a scientist. It's known that we, Anthrocon, is responsible currently for between $5 and $6 million input into the Pittsburgh economy every year in direct and indirect spending. The year that I did this analysis, I think it was 2014, I took the number of 6,000, which sounded to me about a good topping number, because that's the number of people that can stay in the hotels within easy, at the time was easy walking distance. You notice I have to have a shuttle now. And I did this analysis and I sent it to the city of Pittsburgh. And I said, okay, this convention is growing linearly every year. If we get to this point and stop, and we remain at this level, which we will if I don't have the additional hotel space attached to the convention center, by the year 2020, Anthrocon will have been responsible for approximately $70 million cumulative to the Pittsburgh economy. If we continue our current rate of growth, which would be made possible by having those hotel towers, by 2020 we will have been responsible for approximately $100 million. So the fact that those buildings are not there is costing the city of Pittsburgh $30 million. And I, at the time, I'm your number 7 convention. What do you think numbers 1 through 6 would do? And every year I say, well, and they say, we're working on it, we're trying. Lottery ticket. Oh, Almost out of, I am out of time. Any other questions? Last minute questions? Yes, Jessica.
What year do you honestly think that Anthrocon will hit 10,000?
Well, here's the problem with that. I've been asked that question with varying numbers. What year do you think we'll hit 5,000? What year do you think we'll hit 7,000? And I've never been right. If we continue at our current rate of growth, it will probably be around 2020 or 2021 that we will hit 10,000 people. At which point, I'm just not going to come out of my hotel room. And maybe by that point, they will have perfected hologram technology. There'll be a holographic Kage walking around. It's already getting difficult with that number of people. Everybody wants their picture taken with me. I mean, that's flattering. It's really, really cool, but you got 8,000 people that want your picture taken with you. I talked with the board of directors about getting a cardboard cut out and put in the lobby. Get your picture taken with Uncle Kage, but we got a quote for it, and we were gonna do it, but then somebody pointed out, you know, it's only gonna be about 10 minutes before the thing has a Hitler mustache, an eye patch, a dueling scar, a bad dragon thing stuck to it. No, we're not gonna do it.
Maybe you need to get one of those little robots with the TV screen and video cameras that can roam around the convention for you, and you can just stay in your room and control it and have it go all over the place.
Like one of those robots.
Celebrity photos.
How much do they cost?
I don't know, but it would probably wouldn't be that much.
Look, lot. Because, you know, our budget has grown since 2004. Somebody get me a quote for one of these things.
$3,000 or $6,000.
Okay, I was going to say 4 digits. 4 digits, we'll talk.
I think less than 4. I think it's like less than 5 digits.
Really?
You put a little, you know, lead coat on it. It walks around.
No, you have to keep in mind it has to be of a certain height so the first graders can see it and not run over it.
Somebody get me a link to a webpage, all right? Thank you very much.
Did you want to?